Janome.
Hello, welcome to the Janome YouTube channel. I'm Janome Maker Michael Burson, and today I'm going to be sharing a video about the importance of finishing your seams for cosplay and apparel sewing. Now that we see the world opening back up and conventions starting back up again, I'm sure a lot of cosplayers out there are so excited to be making their costumes and wearing them out in public for the first time. Something you'll want to consider as you're putting the finishing touches on your costume is, how are your seams finished? Are they something that's going to last? Is it something that you're going to be able to wear to convention after convention after convention, to photo shoot, and it's going to last for years to come? Or is it something that's going to disintegrate really quickly? This was a lesson that I learned on one of our very first trips to Dragon Con. I made this Hobbit top for my wife Haley, and the moment that we slid it on her, the seams exploded. I had no idea about finishing seams. I didn't know anything about seam edges, and this woven fabric completely disintegrated the second that I pulled the ties on the back. And I vowed to myself that I wouldn't let this happen again, because I want our costumes to last for years to come and not just be a one-time thing that then gets thrown in the trash. So today I'm going to be showing you 5 different ways that you can finish your edges so that your costumes and clothing will last for years to come. The first edge finish that we're going to talk about is through the use of pinking shears. Pinking shears are a special kind of scissors that have these triangular notches in the blade that, when used with fabric, will prevent fraying on the edges. These pinking shears are from Fomori Cutlery, but you can get them from a variety of sellers. So I have a piece of flannel here, and we can see that the raw edge of the fabric is here, and we're already starting to see a little bit of fraying. When using pinking shears, all you have to do is cut along the edge. And you'll see that we're left with this triangular edges. And so these are less likely to fray. They're still going to fray a little bit, so it's not a perfect finish, but this is going to be much less likely to fray than if you were just to leave a raw edge, where these threads are able to get loose. That's because they've been cut in a way that prevents fraying because of the bias of the fabric. So your edges will be pretty protected this way. The next finishes I'm talking about are all things that you can do on your sewing machine, and I'm going to be showing you on my Janome M7 Continental. Now I've sewn a simple stitch here, just a regular seam with a regular seam allowance, and you see here how we're already getting fraying from this cotton, so we want to prevent that. So here's one method that you can use once you're sewing. So every machine comes standard with at least one kind of zigzag stitch. So I'm going to change to this one, number 9, and I'm going to increase the width of the stitches a little bit, just so I can get more coverage. I'm then going to take my edge, fold everything under so that just the raw edge is exposed, and place it so that the zigzag will go over the edge of the fabric. So one side will be on the fabric and the other side will be out in open air. So here, we've now have the zigzag kind of coming out into the air. And so what I'll do is just trim away these little frayed strings that have come off. And there we have a protected edge. I'll repeat this on the other side so that both sides have a protective edge. So when done on both sides, we see here so that the inside of the seam is going to be protected. There'll be no disintegration. Nothing's going to happen here. These seams are going to stay strong and last for a long time. The next method, and one that I'm especially fond of in apparel sewing, is the French seam. Now, the trickiest thing about the French seam is remembering that instead of pinning your pieces right sides together, you actually need to start with your pieces wrong side together. That's the trick to remember for the French seam. So we're going to pin this wrong sides together first. And now we're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance along this edge. And we're going to use a standard straight stitch for this seam. And even if it's not exactly 1/4 inch, that's okay, because what we're going to do now is trim away as close to the stitches as is safe for us to do to reduce that as small as possible. So now we have just a little bit of fabric left. What we'll do now is we will turn this seam so that we have the right sides together and just a little bit of that seam allowance on the inside of that fold. We'll now pin this again. And we're going to do another stitch 1/4 inch from the edge. And now the raw edge of that seam is going to be protected on the inside of the stitch that we just made. If you want to take this piece one step further, you could even do what's called a flat felled seam. What that means is that we're going to take this protected seam allowance, we're going to press it flat, and we're going to do a stitch along the edge of that all the way down, so that it will lay flat on the inside of your work. Like if this was a pant leg or something, you wouldn't want this kind of flapping around. You'd want it laying down flat. So we'll do a stitch all the way down. And now you can see that we have this piece, which has its lovely top stitch going all the way down, and from the inside all of that seam, all of that fraying edge is all protected on the inside, and it is not going anywhere. This is a great technique for clothing as well as for costumes, especially pants and shirts and other things that have these raw edges on the inside. The next technique we're going to talk about is a simple rolled hem. Now perhaps you've got something from a thrift store that you're altering, maybe a skirt or something else, you're putting a slit up the side, and you have this raw edge and you're not really sure, you can't really sew it to anything, it can't really go anywhere. So what you can do is just a simple rolled hem by taking this piece and then folding it up again, protecting the raw edge on the inside of this fold. We'll then do a top stitch along the edge of this so that the raw edge is not exposed. If you've got enough fabric to work with, you can pin it just like I've done here. If you only have a very little bit of fabric left, like perhaps your seam allowance is very, very small, you can roll that tiny little bit and then use like Wonder Clips. I like using Wonder Clips, which are usually available from quilter supplies, but I use them all the time for little tiny detail jobs like this, where you don't have a lot of space to work with, and pinning something it's perhaps even too small to pin. These Wonder Clips are great where they will just keep that in place without having to pin it in very small spaces. Now all the finishes that we've used so far have just used a standard sewing foot as well as standard stitches that come on pretty much any sewing machine. Now if your sewing machine is equipped with an overcast stitch, this is what an overcast foot looks like for my machine, and perhaps your machine came with an overcast foot, or perhaps you can purchase one. But an overcast foot is pretty much the best finish you can get without using a special machine like a serger or an overlock machine. Overcasting is going to be the best that you can do on a standard sewing machine. You should review your sewing machine's manual to see which is your overcast stitch, but it usually looks like this with the triangles and the lines on the side, so I'm going to change to this stitch. Now I've placed my overcast foot on my machine and gotten down here as close as I can so that you can see what's going on. So I've prepared a piece of fabric here. So we have our raw edges showing here. We don't want those to be exposed. And so an overcast foot and the special kind of stitching that it does, we're going to line up the edge of the fabric with this little metal piece here on the end, slide that in. Now what an overcast stitch is going to do is it's going to create that triangle pattern, and the special teeth on the foot are going to help create the shape that's going to protect our raw edge. And so we see here that the overcast foot has helped create this interlocking system of threads that is going to protect your raw edges. I like to do a little rub down here to see if anything's going to stick out, and just go ahead and trim those away real quick so that those don't ever become issues. But now we've got a nice protected edge here, and overcasting is what I've used on the inside of many of my costumes and apparel pieces before I bought a serger. So I think this is one of the best finishes you can get without a serger. So thank you so much for joining me for this video today. I hope that some of these techniques are helpful and you can implement them in your own sewing in the future. My name is Michael. I'm a Janome Maker. You can find me at The Wizard Tailor on Instagram and TikTok, and on our YouTube channel, Michael and Haley. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like and a subscribe for more great sewing content from Janome. See you later.